August 20th, 1945, 9:45 in the morning. Lee Soon-hee crouches in the corner of what had been her prison for 4 years, a comfort station on the outskirts of Seoul that American forces liberated 6 days ago, watching with absolute disbelief as Captain Michael O'Brien and 3 other American soldiers approach her group with an action so unprecedented that her mind cannot process its meaning. They remove their military caps, place them respectfully under their arms, and perform deep, formal bows that acknowledge her inherent human dignity despite years of systematic abuse designed to eliminate any recognition of her worth as a human being. Soon-hee has not experienced respectful treatment from any male authority figure since her forced recruitment at age 16 from her village near Busan. And the sight of foreign soldiers demonstrating the traditional Korean gesture of respect creates psychological vertigo that forces her to question whether liberation represents genuine restoration of human dignity or simply another form of manipulation designed to extract compliance through unexpected psychological tactics. The bow that Captain O'Brien performs reflects his pre-war experience living in Hawaii, where interaction with Asian immigrant communities had taught him that respectful acknowledgement of cultural traditions could create bridges between different populations while demonstrating genuine recognition of human dignity that transcended national boundaries and military classifications to honor universal values about personal worth and social courtesy. O'Brien understands that Korean women who have survived systematic sexual slavery require more than medical care and basic protection. They need recognition of their inherent human worth through cultural gestures that acknowledge their dignity as individuals rather than treating them as damaged goods, requiring efficient processing according to standard military protocols that prioritize operational efficiency over personal restoration and cultural sensitivity. The medical supplies that O'Brien carries include items necessary for treating physical injuries and malnutrition, but his respectful approach recognizes that psychological healing requires addressing spiritual damage caused by systematic dehumanization that had reduced Korean women to instruments serving military objectives while eliminating recognition of their cultural identity, personal worth, and fundamental human dignity. Soon-hee cannot speak as she watches American soldiers demonstrate respect that she had not experienced in 4 years of systematic abuse that had systematically eliminated acknowledgement of her humanity while reducing her to tactical asset whose only value derived from providing sexual services to Japanese military personnel who viewed Korean women as racially inferior beings whose suffering served ideological as well as physical purposes. The silence that grips Soon-hee reflects not just linguistic barriers or medical shock, but profound psychological confusion that occurs when systematic dehumanization suddenly gives way to recognition of inherent human worth through cultural gestures that acknowledge individual dignity while demonstrating that liberation could mean restoration of identity rather than simply exchange of one form of institutional control for another. In slavery, dignity is stolen first. Systematic abuse operates most effectively when it eliminates victim recognition of personal worth through psychological techniques that destroy self-respect, cultural identity, and belief in fundamental human rights that exist independently of institutional classification systems designed to justify systematic exploitation and violence that serves strategic rather than humanitarian purposes. But sometimes, liberation begins with a simple bow that restores what violence tried to destroy. Sometimes, cultural gestures that acknowledge inherent human dignity can begin healing process that addresses spiritual damage caused by systematic dehumanization while demonstrating that authentic liberation requires recognizing individual worth rather than simply providing physical protection or basic medical care that treats symptoms without addressing underlying psychological trauma. The liberation of Korean comfort women by American forces in August 1945 represented encounter between populations whose cultural traditions emphasized different approaches to human dignity, respect, and social interaction, creating opportunities for cross-cultural understanding that could serve healing purposes when individual choice prioritized cultural sensitivity over operational efficiency and military protocol. Soon-hee's background included childhood in traditional Korean family, where Confucian values about social hierarchy, cultural respect, and proper behavior had shaped understanding of human dignity and interpersonal relationships before forced recruitment into comfort station system that had systematically eliminated cultural identity while reducing Korean women to instruments serving Japanese military and ideological objectives. Her 4 years of systematic sexual abuse had included psychological techniques designed to destroy Korean cultural identity while creating dependency on Japanese authority for basic survival needs, eliminating connection to traditional values about personal worth and cultural dignity that had previously provided framework for understanding individual identity and social relationships. The comfort station system had deliberately targeted Korean cultural traditions for elimination through systematic abuse that violated traditional concepts about feminine dignity, family honor, and social responsibility, while creating shame and psychological isolation that prevented victims from maintaining connection to cultural values that might provide psychological resources for resistance or survival. Captain O'Brien's cultural education had begun during pre-war service in Hawaii, where diverse Asian populations had taught him about traditional respect practices, social courtesies, and cultural values that emphasized collective harmony while maintaining individual dignity through appropriate recognition of personal worth and social contribution within community frameworks. His approach to Korean comfort, women liberation, reflected understanding that effective humanitarian assistance required cultural sensitivity that acknowledged traditional values while demonstrating genuine respect for individual dignity that had been systematically attacked through institutional abuse, designed to eliminate cultural identity and personal self-worth. The training that O'Brien had received about Asian cultural practices included instruction about traditional bowing customs, appropriate social interaction, and recognition that healing from systematic abuse would require addressing cultural as well as physical damage through gestures that acknowledged inherent human worth, rather than simply providing efficient medical care and basic protection. Do you think O'Brien's decision to bow reflected genuine cultural sensitivity and respect for Korean dignity? Or do you think it represented strategic psychological manipulation designed to create compliance and cooperation from trauma survivors whose previous experiences might make them suspicious of any unexpected kindness from military authority figures? The cultural significance of bowing in Korean traditional society included recognition of inherent human worth, acknowledgement of social position, and demonstration of mutual respect that maintained community harmony while protecting individual dignity through appropriate recognition of personal value and cultural contribution within established social frameworks that emphasized collective responsibility and individual honor. The restoration of dignity that occurred when American soldiers bowed to Korean comfort women represented recognition that systematic abuse had attempted to destroy cultural identity along with physical autonomy, and that healing would require addressing spiritual damage through gestures that acknowledged traditional values about human worth and social respect that transcended national boundaries and military classifications. The other Korean women in the facility demonstrated varying responses to unprecedented respectful treatment, with some immediately understanding cultural significance, while others remained suspicious that apparent respect might conceal ulterior motives designed to extract compliance through psychological manipulation that exploited cultural values for strategic rather than humanitarian purposes. The gradual recognition among Korean women that American respectful treatment represented genuine acknowledgement of human dignity rather than sophisticated manipulation, created psychological breakthrough that began healing process from systematic dehumanization while restoring connection to cultural values that had been systematically attacked through institutional abuse, designed to eliminate Korean identity. The learning process that American soldiers undertook to understand Korean cultural practices included instruction about appropriate social interaction, traditional respect customs, and recognition that effective humanitarian assistance required cultural sensitivity that demonstrated genuine appreciation for Korean dignity rather than simply efficient processing according to standard military protocols. The therapeutic impact of being treated as worthy of respect began psychological healing process that addressed spiritual damage caused by systematic dehumanization while restoring connection to cultural identity that had been deliberately targeted for elimination through institutional abuse designed to destroy Korean self-worth and social cohesion. The restoration of cultural identity that occurred through respectful interaction included Korean women's gradual willingness to share traditional practices, cultural values, and personal stories that had been suppressed during systematic abuse, while demonstrating that healing required recognition of cultural dignity, as well as provision of medical care and basic protection. The cross-cultural understanding that developed between Korean women and American soldiers included mutual education about traditional values, social practices, and recognition that genuine humanitarian assistance required acknowledging cultural differences while maintaining respect for human dignity that transcended national boundaries and military classifications. The development of trust that occurred through consistent respectful treatment included Korean women's gradual recognition that American soldiers genuinely respected their cultural dignity while understanding that healing from systematic abuse required addressing spiritual damage through continued acknowledgement of inherent human worth and cultural value. The protection of Korean women's dignity that American soldiers maintained in all interactions included recognition that liberation required more than physical safety. It demanded consistent acknowledgement of cultural worth through appropriate respect practices that demonstrated genuine recognition of human dignity rather than efficient processing according to standard institutional protocols. The community of respect that formed between former enemies included mutual recognition of shared human values, while acknowledging cultural differences that enriched understanding about human dignity and social responsibility that transcended national boundaries when circumstances demanded choice between cultural sensitivity and operational efficiency. The integration of Korean cultural practices into liberation procedures included adoption of traditional respect customs while maintaining appropriate recognition of Korean dignity through gestures that acknowledged cultural worth, rather than simply providing efficient medical care and basic protection according to standard military protocols that prioritized operational objectives over cultural sensitivity. The first bow that Soon-hee performed in response to American respectful treatment represented reclamation of cultural identity that had been systematically attacked through institutional abuse, while demonstrating that healing could occur when dignified treatment restored connection to traditional values about human worth and social respect. The recognition that healing required cultural as well as physical restoration included understanding that systematic abuse had deliberately targeted Korean identity for elimination while creating psychological damage that could only be addressed through consistent acknowledgement of cultural dignity and inherent human worth that transcended military classifications and national boundaries. The education that Korean women provided to American soldiers about their cultural traditions included sharing of traditional practices, social values, and personal stories that demonstrated resilience while contributing to cross-cultural understanding that enriched humanitarian assistance through genuine appreciation for Korean dignity and cultural contribution. The documentation that emerged from culturally sensitive liberation included testimony about the importance of respectful treatment for psychological healing, while recognizing that effective humanitarian assistance required cultural sensitivity that acknowledged traditional values about human dignity and social worth rather than simply providing efficient medical care and basic protection. The broader implications of cultural respect in liberation operations included recognition that systematic abuse often targeted cultural identity, along with physical autonomy, requiring humanitarian response that addressed spiritual damage through consistent acknowledgement of inherent human worth and cultural dignity that transcended national boundaries and military classifications. Soon He's post-war recovery included gradual restoration of cultural identity that had been systematically attacked during comfort station abuse, while maintaining appreciation for American soldiers whose respectful treatment had demonstrated genuine recognition of Korean dignity through appropriate cultural gestures that acknowledged inherent human worth. Captain O'Brien's post-war career included continued advocacy for cultural sensitivity in humanitarian operations, while maintaining recognition that effective assistance required acknowledging traditional values about human dignity and social respect that transcended national boundaries when circumstances demanded choice between operational efficiency and cultural appreciation. The Comfort Station facility, where cultural respect had begun healing process, eventually became a memorial site that honored systematic abuse victims while recognizing importance of cultural sensitivity in humanitarian assistance that acknowledged traditional values about human dignity rather than simply providing efficient medical care and basic protection. The Boeing customs that had restored Korean women's dignity became part of standard humanitarian protocols that emphasized cultural sensitivity, while recognizing that effective assistance required acknowledging traditional values about human worth and social respect that could contribute to healing when consistently demonstrated through appropriate cultural gestures. The cross-cultural relationships that developed from respectful interaction included ongoing correspondence between former enemies who had discovered shared values about human dignity while maintaining appreciation for cultural differences that enriched understanding about effective humanitarian assistance and psychological healing from systematic abuse. The education programs that emerged from liberation experiences included instruction about cultural sensitivity in humanitarian operations, while recognizing that effective assistance required understanding traditional values about human dignity and social respect that could contribute to healing when circumstances provided opportunity for genuine cross-cultural appreciation and mutual recognition of inherent worth. In the end, the bows that American soldiers performed for Korean comfort women became symbols of dignity restoration that addressed spiritual damage caused by systematic dehumanization, while demonstrating that authentic liberation required cultural sensitivity that acknowledged inherent human worth through appropriate respect practices that transcended national boundaries and military classifications. The shock that Korean women experienced upon receiving respectful treatment gradually transformed into recognition that healing was possible when cultural dignity was restored through consistent acknowledgement of human worth, proving that systematic abuse could not permanently eliminate cultural identity when circumstances provided opportunity for appropriate respect and genuine appreciation of traditional values. The reverence that began with simple bows created foundation for psychological healing that addressed spiritual damage caused by systematic dehumanization while restoring connection to cultural identity that had been deliberately targeted for elimination through institutional abuse designed to destroy Korean self-worth and social cohesion through psychological as well as physical violence. The transformation from systematic dehumanization to respectful recognition illustrated that authentic liberation required more than physical protection. It demanded consistent acknowledgement of cultural dignity through appropriate respect practices that demonstrated genuine appreciation for human worth, rather than efficient processing according to standard institutional protocols that prioritized operational objectives over cultural sensitivity and individual healing. The cultural bridge that formed between Korean women and American soldiers through respectful interaction demonstrated that healing from systematic abuse could occur when traditional values about human dignity were acknowledged through appropriate cultural gestures that restored spiritual connection while providing foundation for psychological recovery that addressed damage caused by institutional dehumanization and cultural destruction.